Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to CMAfuture, our last morning event series of the year. We are excited to hear from experts who will talk about getting future ready, staying ahead, and how to empower yourself for what's next. Of course, this virtual experience wouldn't be possible without our sponsors and our partners, so I'd like to take a moment to recognize them. Our presenting sponsors today are Bell Media, Kantar, and MasterCard. Our panel sponsors, Accenture and Appnovation. And of course, I always like to recognize our major corporate sponsors, as you see on the screen, as well as all of our partners who really care about keeping us all connected, and we really appreciate their support throughout the year. We hope you'll connect and engage with us on social media for the morning. Don't forget to tag us at CDN Marketing on social media and use the hashtags CMA Events and CMA Future. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll be addressing all the Q&A that we see online with all of our speakers only at the very end of the webinar. And before we get started, I wouldn't mind sharing a few CMA updates with you. First, I'm very excited to remind you about the virtual CMA Awards Gala that will be taking place on November 9th from 5 to 7:30. We've added some elements to make this experience unique and exciting, and we can't wait to celebrate this year's winners virtually. Registration is open, so you can head to cmawards.ca to reserve your spot. It's free for CMA members and only $49 for non-members. Also wanted to share with you a couple of our upcoming experiences. On November 5th, our president and CEO will be on Marketing Connected Live with Bruce Powell. November 10th, we'll be doing a Q&A on the CMA Learner Experience. On November 18th and 19th, we'll be hosting a seminar on privacy essentials for marketers. And please, if you have any questions about any of our events, you can always go to our calendar at cmacalendar.ca. And I see a lot of people signing in. The numbers are growing. So for a minute, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Chartered Marketer Program. And with that, I wouldn't mind doing a short poll. So if you can see the poll on your screen, and you can take a minute to do that, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We launched the 2-year designation program in January last year and now have over 100 learners in the program. Our feedback has been exceptional. We are hearing that the knowledge they are gaining can be applied immediately on their jobs and that they have acquired better soft skills, which is helping to build confidence in their work. CMA is committed to creating exceptional future marketing business leaders, and we will have our first graduates in March 2021. So hopefully you have a second to fill out that poll, and maybe we could take a look at some of the results. Great. Wow, so 80% are aware of the designation. Very happy to see that. We've got 15% of our audience who actually have their designation. That's amazing. And 91% feel that it's important to recognize the marketing profession in Canada. So that's great. I really would encourage all of those who are not sure, that 4% or 16% who say no, to visit charteredmarketer.ca for more information and read more about the program. So let's get started. Our first presentation will share insights on Gen Z and the future of diversity and inclusion. Please welcome our first presenters of the morning, Casey Farrell from US and Canada Monitor and Margaret McKellar from Kantar. Hi, Casey.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Good morning to everyone out there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully we'll cross this first tech hurdle successfully this morning. Okay, I hope everyone is seeing what we're supposed to be seeing. If not, maybe my colleagues can let me know, but otherwise I'll just jump in. So like Lucy said, I'm Casey Farrell. I'm joined by Margaret McKellar. We help manage our Kantar's Canada Monitor Consumer Insights and Foresight service. And a lot of what we're going to see over the course of the next 20 minutes or so is going to be from that service and the data from that service. So why don't we just jump right in? So we're going to have a story in 2 parts today. The first part is going to be about 2020 itself and what a doozy it's been. There have been obviously a lot of implications from a lot of the disruptions that have happened this year, but we're going to focus a little bit on the social aspect of equality and injustice and the moment of reckoning that has happened not just in North America and in America specifically, but here in Canada as well. And then the second part, we're going to dig in on Gen Z and why they represent a future of inclusivity that may change the game from a D&I standpoint. So we'll just jump right in. And Emma, if you could throw up our first poll of the morning, I would appreciate it. We're just asking a question of everyone. How would you describe Canadian culture? This is a question that we asked our panel of Canada Monitor respondents, and we're going to show you the answers to this in just a minute, but I'll leave that up as I go through the next couple of slides so y'all can answer or throw your ideas in there. But the bottom line is 2020 has been a year of reckoning. We'll start though by going backwards a little bit. There we go. So it's well known that multiculturalism is a foundational policy. It's a bedrock cultural principle that informs in no small extent the Canadian national identity, the seeds of which were planted long before it was codified into law 50 years ago. Openness, as Trudeau the Younger says, is the engine of creativity and prosperity. And there's no shortage of national pride in this pillar of Canadian culture, with 8 in 10 Canadians saying that its diversity is one of the country's greatest strengths. So before I go to the next slide, I'd love, Emma, if you could throw up the results to see what folks have answered so far. Wow, very cool. Let me show you what our 5,000 Canadians told us. So it looks like we have pretty similar ideas. Indeed, Canada regards itself as an inclusive society, with almost 2/3 saying that it successfully blends both diversity and inclusivity, and only but a few seeing a lack of one, the other, or both. And that's reflected a bit in what we saw from our audience responses as well. And this stands in pretty stark contrast to your southerly neighbors, for whom diversity is the defining feature, not inclusivity. And far more Americans see neither in their culture than Canadians. So the country's clearly doing something right, right? Yes and no. Ideas about racism and inequality have been simmering in certain quarters of Canadian culture for a long time now. We think of journalist Desmond Cole's incendiary essays about the police practice of carding, the tragic case of Colton Boushie a couple of years ago, have borne out that this is certainly on the minds of Canadians, but it feels though that simmer has come to a rolling boil this year. From Chantel Moore and Regis Korchinski-Paquet, to Chief Alan Adam and Joyce Echequan, instances of apparent or alleged racism and discrimination have rocked the Canadian conscience. Racism, that problem that Americans are saddled with, is a Canadian problem too. The comfort many Canadians take in being the better on this issue has been shaken more this year than perhaps any other year in recent memory. This data from Canada Monitor tells us that a surprisingly large majority of Canadians do feel that racism is a problem in Canadian society. And that's true as we see it down the board. It's true regardless of gender, regardless of generation, regardless of region, and regardless of ethnicity. Perhaps, though, even more surprising is that a majority of all Canadians are willing to acknowledge the legitimacy of white privilege, which is a topic that's very uncomfortable for many. And it's also perhaps surprising that this is true in a country that does have its own history of racial prejudice that it's coming to grips with, and its own history as an overwhelmingly Anglo population for the large portion of its existence, making this all the more remarkable. And again, we see it's not just the attitudes of, say, the young and the restless, with half of baby boomers and more notably, more than half of white Canadians agreeing. And yet again, an across the board majority of Canadians are looking to the commercial sector, to the brands and businesses they buy from, to get involved and to be a part of the solution to cultural and political divisions. And if you ask the CMO of a Canadian business 10 years ago if they should be in the business of mending the social fabric, you'd have made that CMO more than a little uncomfortable. But herein lies the rub. Canadians are rather underwhelmed by what they're seeing from brands to date. Nearly 2/3 of everyone and even larger majorities of younger Canadians feel like companies don't really care all that much about non-white Canadian communities. Which brings us to this moment in time, in which a clear and pretty resounding consumer mandate is emerging. Whether you like it or not, whether you're ready for it or not, the very role of business in Canadian society is changing. Consumers expect brands to get in the game and demonstrate that they stand in solidarity with those who feel invisible, who feel unseen, who feel unheard, and who don't see themselves in the brands they buy. And this is a pivotal moment in Canadian culture. It's a transitional phase from an old paradigm to a new one. So what are the implications of a values shift toward a responsibility to others? Well, it translates into a new set of mandates for which brands are now responsible, acting with big intentions, acting to mend the social fabric, and acting with the courage to face difficult issues. And Margaret is going to take us through some examples of what these look like today.
Thanks, Casey. Now, so let's look at healthcare as a great example. We know from our Monitor Drivers of Change, it's our framework for understanding key macro trends. We know that there's a huge gap between what Canadians expect, their growing interest in health and tech, and what's actually being provided by the system. So we know that, Canadian Medical Association said 71% of people want to book appointments online, but only 9% of doctors actually offer that option. So this fall, Shoppers Drug Mart announced a $75 million investment in the health tech startup Maple. Maple provides an opportunity to connect patients online to a variety of different healthcare professionals to get prescriptions, et cetera. People are looking for brands to offer, to deliver where institutions are failing, to close that void. And it's really the brands that step in and will take on these big bets and deliver on that will reshape the very nature of consumer trust. And in part, due to COVID lockdowns, they've cut us off from neighbors and our local communities. And also COVID and social unrest have really made us rethink and reconsider our role in society and our responsibility to our local communities. This has, in 2020, has seen Canadians really yearning for a stronger connection to their communities. And nowhere is this felt more than in the hospitality and restaurant industry, which is particularly vulnerable. So this spring, Kraft Peanut Butter donated their media space to local businesses. They asked Canadians to join them in nominating local communities who needed that support and shared online with the hashtag Stick Together and gave them all this great media space. So that's a great example of big business getting smaller by finding pockets of acute need and really helping to mend that social fabric. And then there's the responsibility of acting with courage and conviction. So even in the face of backlash and uncertainty and complexity from an operating environment, because at the core of this insight is really the shift in consumer values and the increasing awareness of our collective responsibility to others. So it was a Canadian, actually, Aurora James, who founded the 15% Pledge, an nonprofit organization based in the States. And their mandate is to encourage organizations to increase their representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC-owned businesses, and also BIPOC people in the workforce. And Indigo has actually just last week stepped up to this challenge to take on that pledge to deliver. Not only by the end of next year, they'll have 15% of books on display and new listings as BIPOC authored. But within the next 2 to 5 years, they've pledged to go even further beyond to deliver 23% of all of their offerings and all of their displays from BIPOC communities. So this is a great example of stepping up to that challenge.
It is, Margaret. Thank you for taking us through these examples. I'm going to jump into the next piece of our presentation, and we're going to do a super quick deep dive. Can you do a super quick deep dive? We're about to find out on Gen Z. And Emma, if you could throw up the second of our polls that we were going to ask the audience about today, that would be fantastic. The poll question is: what percentage of Gen Z identifies as exclusively straight? Is it 90%, 83%, 75%, or 67%? We will find out in just a couple of slides. But in the next part here, we're going to delve into the cohort driving all of the change that we just talked about, the one that'll be most responsible for shaping not only Canadian culture in the decade to come, but in defining that operating environment for brands over the next 25 plus years. Let's do a quick level set. Who are Gen Z? They're 8 to 23 this year, as we define them in Canada Monitor. They already represent a fifth of the total population, and despite being thought of mainly as kids, almost a third are employed already. They were all born in the post-smartphone era. A quarter are multiracial, and a quarter are visible minorities. And while there is some overlap between these two groups, they are not the same. Fewer than half of multiracial Canadians are visible minorities. Generations are defined by their starting points, and these are Gen Z's starting points, which, if you think about millennials, these look a little bit different. They've not only inherited a vastly different world, but they're coming of age in a culture defined by very different cultural touchstones. And as a result of those touchstones, those starting points, they develop attitudinal calling cards or core values that tend to stay with the cohort even as they grow up and move through life stages. With Gen Z, openness, resilience, and resourcefulness are those calling cards. That openness is at the heart of today's conversation around the future of D&I in Canada and will guide us the rest of the way today. Okay, so Gen Z not only show a higher, as we see on the data here on the left, affiliation with newer Asian immigrant communities, but also simply just identifying with more cultural communities overall. And we actually see this borne out in additional data here, where almost a third of Gen Z strongly affiliate with a cultural community outside of their own race or ethnicity. Perhaps most stunningly, that openness manifests in their sexual identity. We use a proprietary research methodology that we developed about 5 years ago here at Monitor to capture more of the fluidity within people's sexual identities, more than you can get when you use the usual either or options given in most consumer research. And this is reflected in that bright orange Q+ group. If you have questions about that, we have an entire POV dedicated to what LGBTQ+ looks like in Canada. We'd love to talk to you about it. But for today's conversation, let's look at the boomers. As we can see here, overwhelmingly straight. And that's pretty much what looks like most national research says about the entire Canadian population when it comes to sexuality. So we're going to go by generation. And Emma, if you could throw up the results of that poll, this would be a good time for everybody to see what we all collectively thought. Okay. Spoiler alert, you are an astute audience as we go through the rest of these generations. Here, we're going to see Gen X, slightly more fluid. And then there are the millennials who really ushered in the era of sexual fluidity. But what makes Gen Z so different, however, is that so many are already out and openly identifying as gay, lesbian, and bisexual or trans. And to those of you who guessed 67%, that is a shockingly small number to many. And so good for you guys for knowing that that was most of you knowing that that was the right answer. There's two key dynamics that I want to talk about with regards to openness with Gen Z and culture. So the first one is that they're really keen to preserve and celebrate their own cultures. And this is true of the generation as a whole, as we see on the left, but it's not just a function of having a higher percentage of visible minorities than other generations. In fact, among Gen Z visible minorities, the percentage jumps, but the Gen Z non-visible minority number is still higher than the rest of the Canadian population. Gen Z, I should say, I'm sorry. This insight's pretty critical. It's not just a function of ethnic distribution. It's not just demographics. And the second dynamic is how important it is to Gen Z that they enrich their lives with the input of other ethnic and cultural influences, be it in fashion, entertainment, community, cuisine. And the same pattern we saw on the previous slide holds. Gen Z overall prioritizes these outside cultural influences more than the rest of the population. But again, it's not just a function of visible minorities. Even non-visible minority Gen Zs are more likely to embrace these inputs more than the rest, suggesting that the effects of growing up amidst unprecedented diversity is creating a different starting point for this generation, a starting point of an openness to diversity and an appetite for inclusion. So at Monitor, we have a framework that helps us sort of sort out the cultural orientation of consumers. And the framework sort of sits on two axes: cultural openness and cultural attachment. And that helps us see four distinct kind of cultural mindsets. Aculturals down there at the bottom left are neither terribly interested in their own cultural origins nor that of others. Monoculturals are pretty focused on their own cultural, their own sort of inherited culture, but not really that of others. Culturally blended up there on the top left don't feel really defined by their own ethnic heritage. They don't really identify with it, but they're super curious about others. And then there's polyculturals, who are highly rooted in their own ethnicity and hungry to explore other cultures. These are the folks we're most interested in watching here, because these are the folks who are actively deepening their attachment to culture while enriching their identities by embracing others. And this is that two-way exchange of cultural influence that we see increasing over time in the Canadian marketplace. And when we look at Gen Z, polyculturalism is the dominant mindset. Almost half of boomers fall into the two segments on the low end of the openness axis, while almost 3/4 of Gen Zs are on the high end of that same axis. And this is a sea change in the making. More than 4 in 10 Gen Zs are already in that polycultural quadrant, and that will only grow. Why does it matter? Well, polyculturalism is good for marketing. When it comes to shopping and consumption, polyculturals love discovery. They're highly influential. They're among the first to try new things. In other words, they're explorers, they're influencers, they're early adopters. They are dream customers. And so we've established that we're at a tipping point from which there is no going back, and that Gen Z is going to increasingly equate social justice with the marketplace and brand affinity. And Gen Z are already working towards building a better future for themselves and others as they embrace that responsibility. And they don't expect to do this alone. They expect to do it with you. So when it comes to creating social change, what is the role of brands in meeting Gen Z's inclusivity mandate? Margaret's going to take us through these couple of implications.
Thanks, Casey. So it's hard to believe it's been 8 years since the Bic for her pen social media fiasco. And that really exposed the dangers of, falling into gender stereotypes. But it's not enough to just avoid offending people. We're seeing an increasingly more meaningful changes. And a great example of this is in the fashion industry. We're seeing Canadian brands, launch into gender neutral clothing. Vices just launched by a Canadian social media influencer earlier this year. And Adidas, or Adidas, however you like to say it, has opened a gender neutral store. And the retail environment is a really good thing to think about. If you don't identify with historical norms on gender, you're walking into a retail environment and right away you're being asked to select a gender, sometimes even on a different floor. So this is a really big challenge for that industry moving forward. And brands need to keep pace with social change. So things are changing quickly. In 2018, that's the first time that Ontario issued, offered a gender-neutral birth certificate. So Joshua Ferguson was the first person in Ontario issued with that, with the option of either, selecting X as a third gender or having that removed entirely, your gender removed entirely. And the federal government followed last year, offering the same thing on passports. Gillette has a great campaign last year that really highlights this rethinking traditional gender norms. So, and rethinking masculinity. So it was a Toronto-based transgender activist and artist, Samson Bognabanu Brown, who talks in this film about transitioning and that time he spent thinking about the man he'd like to become. It then shows Samson's father guiding him through his first shave, which is done with, with guidance and support that will feel familiar to those who went through that milestone as young men. And Gillette's really on the path to portraying this more diverse view of masculinity. And we've already seen how Gen Z is polycultural. And to be able to meet that, we need changes, authentic changes, not just on screen, but in the boardroom where those ideas and where those decisions are being made. And the industry is starting to make some changes. So Bell Media and the ICA, the Institute of Communication Agencies in Canada, have recently launched the inclusive idea, so inclusivity, diversity, and equity in advertising. And this is a contest to award $1 million worth of free media to the campaign that demonstrates a clear message of diversity. And Taxi, the ad agency Taxi, is also taking this on, eliminating all of their unpaid internships and developing a paid internship program exclusively for Black Canadians. So this, again, is starting to change at the root of where ideas and decisions are being made. Gen Z, they're change agents, and they expect you to join them on this. So they, as early witnesses to change and experience in actually helping to spur this change, they are making their voices heard, and they want you to join them on this mission. So here's a couple of examples. We've seen lots of examples of climate change protests organized by students. This is actually a smaller example to show you how prevalent this is throughout. So this is a group of 100 high school students in Gatineau last week that were dressed in skirts to protest the toxic masculinity, the dress code, and the homophobia that exists in the organization. And York students organized the Black Lives Matter movement, but they specifically called out their university on doing performative acts, on making claims that did not really reflect the reality of the experiences. So you need to pass the sniff test. Gen Z don't see leadership as a solo activity. They are really upending that traditional view on leadership, and this has implications for us. So earlier generations kind of rallied around a hero or spokesperson. When an issue came up, they demanded that they looked to a specific individual to take charge. And Gen Zs, on the other hand, really see it more like a relay race where you're passing the baton back and forth between team members. And we can see this difference in how race relations used to be addressed in the past, where you had key figureheads like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, very visible leaders driving that civil rights movement. And now when you think of the Black Lives Matter movement, there are a couple of figureheads, but really it's more difficult to pinpoint specific individual leaders of that. It's much more organic and shared and inclusive. And this has implications for us as brands. So brands, Gen Z expect us to move from taking that leadership role to rolling up our sleeves and jumping in and joining them on that journey. So don't assume you need to be leading the pack. You need to be alongside and working with them. And you should never, you need to make sure that you're staying 100% loyal to them and don't be defensive. Gen Zs are not going to waste their breath trying to convince you or argue with you. They're just going to go around you. And this ties back to what we talked about in this first section and what we anticipate the future to hold, that Gen Zs assume greater cultural influence and eventually will come to define what the mainstream culture is. They'll bring significantly different version of diversity and inclusion with them. And that needs new marketing strategies, new ideas about branding, and a higher bar for inclusivity and equity, and a new set of rules of how we engage with them. And with that, we'll hand it back to Lucy to take us on to some more great content. And we look forward to joining you in Q&A at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Casey and Margaret. I have to say, I can really relate to that research. I have both a Gen Z and a millennial at home, so I can definitely relate to all of that. Just another reminder to submit your questions throughout with that icon at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A icon, and we'll get to those questions at the very end. So let's get to our next session, which will take a deep dive into the importance and advancements of attribution in the media landscape. Please welcome from Bell Media, Philippe René, Senior Research Director. Hey, Philippe, how you doing?
Hi, Lucy, thank you. Hi, everyone. So let me share my screen first. Here we go, presentation mode. Excellent. So I think most of you are familiar with the concept of attribution, and as it is widely used in online advertising, but attribution in TV is quite new. In fact, this summer, we were really excited at Bell Media to be launching the first linear TV attribution platform in Canada. And we truly think that TV attribution will become an essential tool for marketers in the years to come. So, and hopefully we'll see why during this presentation. So our agenda, I'll briefly introduce you to Bell Media's SAM platform. Then we'll dive deeper into the attribution component of SAM. I'll give you an overview of the model, how it works, and the most exciting part, we'll get to share some real life example from IKEA's summer TV campaign. IKEA and their agency Cara were the first ones in Canada to leverage our SAM attribution platform. And we're really glad because they have accepted that I share some key results with you today. Finally, there are really important factors to consider when we measure the attribution performance of a campaign. We'll wrap up with those. So marketers have known for a long time that TV is one of the most powerful media to build brands. But TV has also been one of the most difficult media to measure. Not in the sense of estimating the reach and frequency of campaigns, but measuring the effectiveness of TV advertising in terms of actual business outcomes has been a bit more challenging. Of course, we rely on consumer surveys to measure the brand building impact of TV, and we also use marketing mix models to assess the return on investment of TV in a multi-media buy. But the reality is that with digital today, marketers have access to a wide array of tools to track consumer conversions and optimize their campaigns, often in real time. So this put a bit of pressure on, well, I would say a lot of pressure on media channels such as TV to do the same. And in a sense, it provided us with an objective and a roadmap. This is what we needed to do, bring the data-driven capabilities of digital to TV. This is why at Bell Media, we have developed a SAM TV platform. The SAM acronym stands for Strategic Audience Management. Our goal was, and still is, to combine TV's massive reach with the data-driven capabilities of digital to help brands identify and connect with the right audiences on the right channels. So before we go any further, and since our SAM platform leverages first-party data from Bell, meaning Bell Mobility, 5 Internet, and 5 TV data, important to mention that our data is aggregated, anonymized, and that individuals cannot be identified. Our audience segments have a set minimum to protect anonymity, and our audience platform is audited by a third party to ensure data integrity. All right. Concretely speaking, as an advertiser, you can use our SAM data-driven platform to help you plan your TV campaign, activate it across our TV networks, and measure its outcomes in order to learn and improve your performance. The planning pillar means that you can pinpoint a strategic audience you wish to target based on actual consumer behavior. So for instance, the home decorator segment, which was used by IKEA in their TV campaign, which we'll discuss in a second, would be people who have visited a home decor related website in the past 30 days, based on actual browsing data from Bell Mobility. When it's time to activate your campaign, you can connect with your strategic audience on the Bell Media TV programs most watched by these people, home decorators, for instance here. And once you have activated your strategic target, you want to measure the effectiveness of your campaign, not in the sense of traditional reach, frequency, and GRP delivery, but knowing if your campaign drove the expected business outcomes. So here the measurement component takes form of attribution. And as most of you know, attribution is the science of linking business results to advertising, or in other words, attributing the right credit to a media channel for driving business outcomes. Attribution is key in the media cycle because if we want to improve the performance of our TV campaign, well, we need to be able to measure its performance in the first place. So the real benefit that we get with attribution is being able to see what works, what doesn't, and optimize accordingly. And this is why attribution is so important for the future of TV. It provides optimization levers, I would say, and a greater accountability. As a refresher, there are three general forms of attribution. At the top of the marketing funnels, there's brand lift attribution. So what we want to measure here is if the advertising campaign had an impact on your brand health metrics, such as awareness, perceived quality, or reputation. At the middle funnel stage, we have online attribution. People exposed to your ad might be interested in your product and visit your website to learn more about it, which is a great proxy for consideration. We'll talk more about this in a second. At the lower end of the funnel, we have offline attribution, which checks if people exposed to the ad campaign visited your brick and mortar store in a higher proportion than those unexposed. At Bell, we offer all three types of attribution reporting, but with SAM TV attribution, we took it to another level by building an automated platform fueled with first-party data. Here's our quick overview of our SAM TV attribution model. And as mentioned at the top of the presentation, we only use aggregated and anonymized data. With 5 TV viewership data, we first separate people who have been exposed to an advertising campaign from those unexposed. In our example here, the advertiser is IKEA, as we're going to be sharing actual results in a few slides. With Bell Wireline data, we then look at online browsing behavior and see if people exposed to the ad went to IKEA's website in a higher proportion than those unexposed. And finally, we gather conversion insights such as the profile and behavior of those who converted to help inform and optimize future campaigns. We call this a deterministic model, as we can say with certainty whether website visitors were previously exposed to the TV campaign or not. And we think that such a deterministic model has a lot of advantages. Many attribution models in the States or abroad are probabilistic, which is great, but it means that they rely on a match between advertising schedules and website traffic patterns. It tells you that some peaks in that website traffic are probably related to advertising. With a deterministic model, you get to see the actual difference in behavior between people exposed to your TV campaign and those not exposed. So it's the actual behavior as opposed to the probable behavior with a probabilistic model. Okay, so when advertisers request a TV attribution report through SAM, these are the key metrics they have access to. The lift in website visits that can be attributed to the TV ad, the estimated proportion of households reached by the campaign. We're tracking daily conversions, meaning the number of people exposed to the TV ad who also visited the advertiser's website on the same day, cumulative conversions, and insights such as the optimal advertising frequency, profile, and behavioral clusters. And on the picture here, you have a good idea of the look and feel of the platform. All right, let's jump into the heart of it and look at some real-life results. As mentioned, IKEA and their agency Cara were the first advertisers in Canada to request an attribution report through SAM this summer, and they have graciously accepted to share some key results. So I want to thank everyone at IKEA and Karen and team at Cara for making this possible. The TV campaign on Bell Media ran from June 25th through August 6th and was about the beautiful possibilities of life at home. As we all know, with the pandemic, our home has become more important than ever. It's where we work, learn, play, connect. It's now really at the center of our lives. And I thought IKEA's message was spot on, with our homes teaching us how to connect, how to change our scenery, and how to welcome tomorrow. There was a positive and optimistic feel to the ad, both in the imagery and in the soundtrack, which is an acoustic version of a famous song by Jimmy Eat World. I won't sing, but you would recognize the lyrics. Just take some time, little girl, you're in the middle of a ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be all right. So hopeful lyrics, well suited to their current context. So in a nutshell, I thought the IKEA ad was inspiring, comforting, and conveyed the strength of the IKEA brand. Good, let's hear some key attribution results. Drum roll. Okay, our first finding was that 70% of IKEA traffic generated by households exposed at least once to the TV campaign. As we saw with our attribution model, we're able to monitor website visits from people exposed and not exposed to advertising using 5TV viewership data and Bell Wireline browsing data. So this was kind of expected because of TV's massive reach, as we said in the beginning. But it goes to show that TV can quickly move the needle on marketing objectives. One of the most telling metrics in attribution is what we call the exposed versus unexposed lift. Here on the left, the proportion of households visiting IKEA's website was 15.3% higher among those exposed to the TV campaign than among those not exposed to the TV campaign. And what's really interesting on the right is that the more people watch TV, the more they visited IKEA's website. The campaign generated a lift 3 times as strong among heavy TV viewers, 44%, 45%. What's really important to mention here is that IKEA's TV campaign did not have a drive-to-web component, meaning that there was no explicit call to action for consumers to go and visit IKEA's website. Triggers like limited offer or visit us online now to learn more. And even without such a call to action, the campaign prompted viewers to go online. Maybe it was a reminder that they wanted a piece of home furniture at IKEA, or maybe it reminded them that IKEA has great ideas for the home. Maybe it brought them a sense of comfort during this pandemic. Whatever the trigger, people exposed to the TV campaign went to IKEA's website in a higher proportion than those unexposed. I think these results are a great testimony to the power of TV, to the strength of the IKEA brand, and the quality of IKEA's ad. Similar to conversions increasing with TV viewership, we observed that the more people were exposed to the ad, the more they responded positively by visiting IKEA online. We saw that the conversion rates increased up to a frequency of 10 ad exposures, which was the optimal ad frequency for this campaign. And of course, these insights are great from a media planning perspective and can be leveraged to inform upcoming strategies. Since we're monitoring online conversions on a daily basis, we've been able to establish that IKEA's TV campaign generated the highest share of visits to the website on Saturday, August 1st and Sunday, August 2nd, which was the civic holiday weekend in Canada. So it looks like Canadians were in a home decorating mood during this weekend. On August 1st, 24% of IKEA's traffic was linked to TV ad exposure, and on August 2nd, it was 23% of all traffic. And of course, this daily conversion intelligence could be used to schedule special events, for instance, or marketing initiatives. One exciting dimension of attribution is that you can see which consumer segments show the highest online conversion rates. And just as a reminder, so a conversion event is when someone was exposed to IKEA's TV ad and also visited IKEA's website on the same day. The IKEA TV campaign resonated really well with segments such as kids and careers and young diverse families. These are Environics segments. In the first case, these are large, well-off, middle-aged suburban families, whereas the second segment is comprised of urban, upscale, and South Asian families. This is really practical intelligence to have, as we can target and activate these set audience segments in a future SAM campaign. And these insights could also be leveraged when crafting a future ad creative, for instance. Finally, we looked at the impact of IKEA's campaign on brand health metrics using YouGov Brand Index. YouGov is Bell Media's partner for brand impact studies. And since the TV ad focused on the IKEA brand rather than calling for a direct response, we wanted to find out if the campaign had moved the needle on core brand health metrics, such as reputation, quality, or overall impression. And as you can see, for all brand health metrics, IKEA surpassed the retail sector score by 37% on average during the TV campaign period. And some of these metrics went up considerably during and after the campaign. So this was great news for IKEA and Cara and confirmed that the campaign struck a chord in consumers' heart during this difficult context. It resonated really well from a brand impact perspective at the top of the funnel. And as we saw with online attribution, it also generated a strong drive to web response, showing that consumers' consideration for IKEA also went up significantly during and after the TV campaign. So again, I want to thank IKEA and Cara for giving us the okay to share these great results with you today. Now, our last section, and really important one, there are some key considerations that marketers need to have in mind when measuring the success of a TV campaign with attribution. Prior to launch, we have proof tested our CMAfuture attribution platform with hundreds of campaigns across several categories. And we found that there were 7 key factors influencing attribution performance. First, the campaign objective. Was it a brand play or a direct response campaign? Quite important to choose the right KPI to define success and the right attribution model to assess performance. Campaign weight. The GRP level obviously impacts the overall performance, and we generally see a positive correlation between conversion scores and campaign GRPs. The awareness level. Is your brand well known or is it a new entrant in the category? This will dictate the optimal creative strategy and media weight. Business context. COVID is a great example why we need to take the business context into account when doing attribution. It had a major impact on the website traffic for many brands that we surveyed. Meaning that the baseline has changed with COVID and that we cannot compare with last year, for instance. Media activity. Was TV the only media involved? Were there other forms of advertising? Digital video, for instance, can create a bias in the control group if not factored in the model. Was there a call to action in the ad? So as discussed, well, for IKEA, the combination of well-established brand with a life-at-home context and a TV ad that struck a chord in consumers' heart delivered really great results. But I would say that for most advertisers, online attribution works best with a clear drive-to-web component in the message since we're tracking the lift in website visits. And finally, the advertising category. As you might expect, the call to action for a home furniture ad is different from the call to action you might get with a cereal ad, for instance. So when we track performance, we need to do so against the right category benchmarks. In summary, an attribution report by itself doesn't say much. We need the full context to be able to interpret the results in the right way. All right, so in conclusion, I want to leave you with 3 key messages. First, we saw great results from IKEA's TV campaign. IKEA and Carol were the first in Canada to innovate with linear TV attribution through SAM, which is Bell Media's data-driven platform that helps advertisers plan, activate, and measure. And we truly feel that deterministic TV attribution will gain traction in the future as it provides marketers with optimization levers and accountability. And finally, as marketers, we need to take 7 key factors into account to perform attribution with confidence. On that note, I thank you for your attention. Lucy?
Great. Thank you so much for that, Philippe. Great insights. It's great to see that Bell Media is leveraging all the service resources and data across the Bell Canada network. So great innovation there. Thanks so much for that. Just a reminder that today's experience will also be available as a recording and that you will get in the post-event email and copies of these presentations as well. So let's get to our next presentation. Up next to talk about the future of retail, please welcome our next presenter of the day, Kobe Gerldson from MasterCard. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lucy, for the introduction. I will do like everyone else and share my screen. 1 second, please. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity. First and foremost, very much looking forward to the next 20 minutes, sharing some of our research and our insights that we have recently canvassed in the Canadian population. First and foremost, I did want to share that it isn't a research presentation without at least a quick legal disclaimer on the data. And so I'm just showing that for a few seconds. In doing so, of course, really going to dive right into our perspective of the research that we conducted and how we came about it, and also talk a lot about the insights that were derived from it. So we do a fair number of research studies in partnership with our marketing and communications team, especially focused on Canada research. We've done a lot of research in the past around topics such as the future of security, which was our perspective on cyber, the future of income, which was our perspective on the gig economy. And most recently, we were very focused on looking at the future of retail and the future of e-commerce and payments in light of the year that we've had. For the research, what we generally do is we partner with a research partner. In this case, we partnered with our partners at Harris Poll to conduct a research across North America with about 4,000 citizens, 2,000 in Canada and 2,000 in the US. We are going to focus exclusively on the Canada insights for today, given the audience and being Canadian representation. But important to note that we do take a look at the North America region when we do these research projects. The three areas of focus for us will be, how has COVID-19 changed commerce in general and adoption of commerce? What does the future hold from a digital perspective? And then also a quick look at payments. When I took a quick look at the audience members here, we have a nice coverage across banks, merchants, retailers, non-for-profits, as well as agencies. So tried to customize the content accordingly based on the audience. And also this presentation is actually quite longer, much longer than the 20 minutes we have allotted. So if you do want to go deeper, feel free to reach out to me. I'll leave my details at the end. Another thing that's really important is when we do this research, we do this research for a number of reasons. We want to understand the hearts and minds of what Canadians are thinking, but we also have a very opportunistic business that we're in, where we are able to see a non-aggregated, non-personally identifiable transactional behaviors of our cardholders. So as you can imagine, we can go out and take a look at merchants' behaviors, or rather cardholder behavior at specific merchants, and monitor how the impacts are for specific industries. As a reminder, we do not have SKU level data. So we don't know what you're buying, on your receipt. We know that you transacted a specific retailer, at which retailer and when, but we don't retain identifiable information about who you are. The other thing as well is we're also deeply respectful of privacy when it comes to that. So we always report out, even when we're doing our own research, data at an aggregate level, which is important. So for today, there are three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about insights around the shift of preferences to digital, which is no surprise. The focus on the future of stores and what that looks like from a cleanliness perspective and the expectations of Canadians, and some of the shifts of behavior when it comes to payments, especially around contactless. So jumping into preferences, no surprise when we surveyed Canadians around their mentality during before, during, and what they perceive their mentality would be after COVID, because we're still in it. No surprise, a lot of themes that make a lot of sense. The bubbling up of being a smart spender, being highly aware, being very much panicked shopping. I think for me, as a great example, I think at the height of COVID, I ran to Costco and bought 2 kilos of lentils and 10 cans or 15 cans of mushroom soup, which were two items I've yet to utilize, but at the time it felt more comfortable for me to have those items when it came to the panic shopping right at the beginning of the lockdown. No surprise to see that Canadians felt that way, especially right in the middle of it. Another thing we've seen as well is a focus on being very precise and focused on buying, right? Makes a ton of sense that Canadians would feel this way. Limiting the number of visits, going in with a purpose, going potentially to bigger box merchants because they have everything in one place, grabbing all those items and going home, right? But when we look at the specific shifts of Canadians reporting or consumers reporting on where they were spending their money, no surprise that groceries really a significant portion of the basket. Home improvement bubbling up as we sit at home all day and look at our walls and wonder what we can do with our place. And of course, entertainment, especially when you look at subscription services. This presents an interesting challenge for small businesses, because if you're going out with a purpose of just getting certain items, if you're less likely to potentially go to small merchants. So, the importance of digitization of these small merchants to serve you at home is incredibly important. We have a longstanding partnership with Digital Main Street, which is very much focused in partnership with the federal and provincial governments to digitize merchants so that they can continue to sell during a period, even if they are under certain lockdown restrictions. And so this is incredibly important as we think about shopping behaviors of small businesses. No surprise that travel and vacation spending definitely plummeted at this moment, although we are starting to see good recovery, especially in the hotel space, and some steady recovery of domestic travel in the airline industry as well. This is a bit of an eye chart, and it's definitely on smaller screens, a bit tough to see, but this is meant to just show what shopping methods and shifts have happened that were already online and switching to online. At the top of the online behavior space, music, books, video games, no surprise, very high. At the lowest point, household goods and pet supplies continue to be largely in person. In addition, we saw a significant explosion of spending reported from Canadians around personal care and beauty, medicine and pharmacy, as well as a few furniture and home decor. But all in all, great growth across the board, starting at as low as 55% in the music category. I found the personal care interesting. Pet supplies, not surprising, especially if you think about the boom of people adopting or bringing in pets to their home as they look for, someone additional in their homes, especially in the winter months. No surprise when it comes to digital on-demand services, food delivery services reported being quite significant, especially with millennials. Grocery delivery services and other sorts of subscription services being a high, especially right when we did the survey, which was in July. We were sort of still in lockdown period, although on our way to recovery. We do plan on probably doing another survey to the existing audience later in the year, early next year, to see comparatively how they're feeling. But all in all, there was definitely a lot more comfort in the order and delivery, but there is still a population that was very comfortable with pickup in store. I recently was talking to a furniture manufacturer that, of course, significantly sees that as a focus, because you can't really ship marble tables to your home, which makes a lot of sense. When we asked Canadians what was the reasons for shopping online, it was a mix, but largely it had to do with safety and sanitation, as well as convenience, and in some cases, regulatory requirements as to why they would be shopping online versus at home. Nothing surprising there. And when we asked Canadians, what did they miss, or rather more so, what do they like about their shopping habits of online and person, there's no surprise that it's a little harder to window shop when you're online, although the e-tailers and retailers are very strong in their algorithms to make recommendations based on your surfing and cooking. Ultimately, I think the Canadians still want to have a bit of that discovery when they're shopping in person that's missing, right? And definitely a lot harder to buy in bulk, although I would say I've been able to buy in bulk just fine online, but something that was reflected in the research as well. Moving on to the future of stores. So we spent the first section showcasing research that was around digital behaviors, shift in specific categories. We want to also think about what does the future hold when it comes to comfort of Canadians across each of the different age groups and geographies to get them to be more comfortable and continue to be comfortable with coming back to the store. And it continues to be clear that we definitely are looking at our shopping behaviors in brick and mortar stores being very differently in this post 2020 era. The way cleanliness is very important. The importance of frictionless shopping. We've seen some significant innovation, and I've heard different facts of e-com has moved 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future. But nonetheless, another piece that's really important is we've seen some significant innovation in stores thinking about cleanliness and making it comfortable for people to come back and shop. When we spoke to Canadians, though, as I mentioned briefly before, shopping in real life is still missed, right? There are aspects of it that, and even for myself, right? I've hardly, as personal contribution, but I find it very hard to shop for clothing, and I can understand that many of you do, especially for those that might, like myself, that have packed a few extra pounds during this period. There are certain things you like to touch and see when you're shopping. There's also this notion of, wanderlust or treasure hunting that comes out of shopping in store and discovery. There have been some companies that are testing digital social technologies in shopping, because a big part of shopping as well is the social connection of going with friends or with family, and that is sort of missing when you're thinking about your experience online. And lastly, despite digitization, there's still people are missing talking and consulting with a store associate in person, which is interesting to see. When we asked Canadians, with specific categories of business, what they're missing, especially in in-person, household goods, electronics, personal care products, they missed shopping for these, items in person. The ability to touch items in pet supply, office supply, books, no surprise. And then convenience, right, is a big focus when it comes to, prepared foods and music and things like that. Nothing surprising, but really good to see Canadians' perspectives here. In addition, we asked Canadians, what is important when you think about the appropriate measures to essentially make you return to shopping, or rather make you more comfortable with returning to shopping in store. And at the top of the list, when we looked at research, it was mandating masks for shoppers, mandating masks for employees, contactless payments at checkout. We're very proud of the decision that we made at the outset of the pandemic to increase contactless limits to $250, which we were happy to see the other payment brands follow suit as well. I think that was a big success for us in helping do our part in a small way to speed up checkouts, but also limit us from touching what were being perceived as those dirty pin pads, at least in the consumer's eyes. So really important to see that was bubbling up in research. Also maximizing layout. We're seeing a lot of stores and retailers rethink their layouts, putting caches at the back versus the front, so lineups aren't necessarily right in your face when you enter the retail store, especially with small businesses. Thinking about redesigning aisles and making it more open. We're seeing that across not just retail stores, we're seeing that in hospitality as well. And then if you work your way down the research, things like temperature checks, ability to reserve a shopping window, things like that came up as well. We also have been watching what sort of in-store health precautions remain top of mind with Canadians. And of course, first and foremost, is sanitization practices and policies. There are some interesting technologies that are being tested around the world. In Singapore, for example, if you're familiar with the four-legged Boston Dynamics robots, they're being used in parks to keep people spaced out and socially distanced from each other. There's a European grocer in Germany that has been using the Pepper robot to walk the aisles and remind customers about the important, social distancing practices. But of course, return policy, flexibility, shipping times, these come up as very important as we think about in-store health, what's top of mind with in-store shopping. We're also seeing cleanliness become a very big and important KPI with Canadians, especially bubbling up with centennials. And for the definition, centennials is also another term that is used for Gen Z, for those that are wondering. We did survey centennials, millennials, boomers, and all the demographics in this survey, which was great to get that coverage. But there's also been some interesting innovations that have been introduced specifically in this space. Lush out of the UK has a 30-second evaporating hand soap, which is essentially the amount of time minimum you should be washing your hands. There are smart IoT technology companies looking at enabling masks that have Bluetooth technology that allow you to speak to on the phone while still wearing a mask. So there's some very interesting innovations. But of course, it's very important that from a cleanliness perspective, but also eco perspective, that as you think about what's important to you as a shopper. As we talk about revenge spending, this is a question that is asked quite a bit. We're seeing recovery in certain categories, we're seeing hyper growth in others, but what in the Canadian's mind is the #1 of revenge category spend? Not for today, but we have another study that we did with this audience focused on the future of travel. And the #1 revenge spending category that came through was around travel. And that's not surprising, right? Pent up demand. Interestingly enough, yesterday, there was a lot of news in the East Coast, travel agencies creating a bubble in Cuba with a travel agency. And as of last night, 50% of their plane flights, charter flights to this particular resort are already sold out. So there's definitely a lot of pent up travel. We're seeing even domestic travel, even during COVID, was quite strong. Counties like Prince Edward County experienced more than double their traffic than the year before, as we have nowhere else to go at this moment. Lastly, I want to finish, because there are financial institutions in the audience, around Canadians' perspectives on payments. So we're very fortunate that we're a highly contactless market, very mature in this space, but self-reported, we still saw a nice bump of contactless card usage in our survey, and we also see it in our data, as well as the use of credit and debit bumping as well. There's also been a proliferation of installments, players online, as well as social buying that's happened. We're seeing a lot of growth in those areas, as well as voice assistance. When we think about what has increased and will remain or has decreased, the #1 decreased area is cash, which is not surprising. There is a belief of cash being dirty. The Bank of Canada, I think in June, had issued directions on if you were to wash your money, how you should wash it properly. The US Treasury has also issued similar research, or rather guidance on the cleanliness, and even the WHO has spoken about contactless being the cleanest way to pay during this pandemic, which is interesting to see. In addition, we see that this will remain. Cash is really being canceled, and largely due to things around sanitization, store preference, convenience, and speed of getting in and out. And these are some of the themes and words that bubbled up when we did survey: quick, clean, secure, when it comes to things around cards, but contaminated, dirty, and annoying when it came to things around cash. And the majority of Canadians, at least in our survey, are worried about cleanliness and likely will maintain their current behaviors when it comes to using cards and other form factors, which is not surprising. We're coming to a close, and I definitely will have a question and answer period later into this morning's session. But 3 key takeaways to leave you with. As you are a retailer or a merchant, or even if you're thinking about yourself as an agency partner to these customers, it's very continuously important to invest in being a compass for digital consumers, or rather digital newcomers, and also leaning into driving convenience. And that convenience can be in cleanliness practices, different solutions that allow for more convenience as someone is shopping with you. These are just some of the ways, but definitely very important to Canadians today as we look at the new year. And it's very clear that Canadians are very pleased with digital form factors of payments and contactless payments. So I believe many retailers have moved in this direction already. But please, if you haven't, it's definitely worth consideration because it's something that's definitely being sought after by Canadians. And with that, thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Lucy.
Great, thanks so much, Kobe. Some really great insights there. I'm agreeing with the travel. I know that I have a lot of travel credits, as I'm sure a lot of people out there have. So definitely travel is at the top of my list in regards to having that revenge spending going on. So thanks for that. Now we'd like to get to our final session, which is a panel discussion where we'll discuss views on key issues facing brands now and what the future holds in light of mass global changes. So please welcome our moderator, Corinne Rushstrutz from Kensington Health Foundation, who also sits on our brand council, Pina Shiera from Accenture, Allison Humphreys from Appnovation, and Sarah Chamberlain from CMAfuture Foundation, who also sits on our NFP council. So welcome everybody, and take it away, Corinne.
Thank you, Lucy. Hi, everyone. I'm Corinne Rushstrutz. I'm the CEO of the Kensington Health Foundation. And if you don't know about Kensington Health, we offer accessible community healthcare from clinical services to long-term care and hospice. And during a pandemic, I will say that it has been a remarkable journey because community care is needed most now when hospitals need to be kept free. So as we're talking about all of these things, and when I am not fundraising during the largest global health crisis that we've ever seen, I also sit on the Brand Council, and the Brand Council is a very important space in CMA. We provide thought leadership on key issues regarding brands and strategy for marketers. And I'm here with 3 brand experts today, and we're going to talk about all of these issues as we all think about how are we navigating brands during this truly remarkable period. And so I think it gives us a lot to talk about, but first I'm going to ask my colleagues to please introduce themselves, and then we can jump right in.
Great, thanks Corinne. I'm Pina, nice to be here today. I lead the marketing advisory practice for Accenture Canada. We really focus on helping the CMO, the CDO, the CEO to understand where business growth will come from, and designing, architecting how their organization realizes that growth, but even more importantly, how to build the capabilities and skills that are required around that. As a former CMO, I've spent most of my career leading marketing and sales organizations at companies like Kraft, Coca-Cola, Conagra, J&J, both in Canada and the US. And I'm excited and honored to be here alongside this talented panel.
Thanks.
I'm Allison Humphreys. I'm Vice President of Strategy for Appnovation, which is a digital consultancy. Our main focus is around innovation across customer experience, digital product development. And then prior to joining Appnovation, I spent several years in the agency space, working across brand strategy, integrated marketing, digital innovation for a number of global and national brands.
Hello, everybody. Sarah here, Vice President, Marketing and Donor Experience at CMAfuture, but only one member of a world-leading marketing team. Single parent to wonderfully unique 11-year-old boy. Stress pandemic purchases have included kayak, which I've used exactly 6 times, and the adoption of a 3rd cat, and personal and professional advocate for a world where mental health is health.
Well, that's a very good place to begin. So thank you all. Let's start with what's all around us. So we're deep in the second wave. These are really anxious days, and we've seen that, I think, is a theme that exists, not just this morning, but in our lives. And we're seeing brand culture shift in response to that. So I think the best place to start is by just calling that out, right? It's all here. So Pina, I want to start with you. How can organizations think about responding during these unprecedented times? You've kind of got a bird's eye view.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief because there's so much to really dive into. And I think a lot of the themes we've heard this morning. So what I'll probably just touch on is reinforcing a lot of what we heard. But at Accenture, what we're doing is helping clients by really truly understanding, going into deep knowledge of how consumer behavior has changed. We've surveyed in 20 markets over about 9,000 respondents. And we're seeing that, no surprise, the experience needs to change, and brands need to understand first and foremost, what are those human behavior changes? And I'll just touch on some of them, because it really is, it's almost an experience audit that I think brands need to be thinking about. What was the experience? What am I aiming for? And how has it changed? And, areas like building trust. I mean, we definitely touched on that this morning, and, we call it the cost of confidence. The erosion of confidence will certainly make trust way more important than ever before. And, to be effective, rebuilding trust quickly and credibly, authentically, focusing on confidence building at every channel and every touch point, and justifiably, optimism will sell well. As you heard this morning, ignoring diversity is not an option if you want to authentically build trust. So that's one theme that certainly through the eyes of the consumer will shift how they establish their loyalty to brands. The other is around virtual. We're all virtually working, consuming, socializing, and this is shifted in a massive way. Anything virtual, if it can be virtual, it will. So we sort of call this, digital, is no longer just an option. It's out of necessity. And really winners will be those who test and explore all of the associated creative possibilities. Right. The third is around every business is a health business. And this is something that sounds really not achievable, but if you think about every experience, whether it's going to Tim Hortons to get your coffee or, trying on clothes, every component of that experience now needs to be safe. And we heard that this morning on the future of retail. Cocooning is another one. Loved seeing how IKEA has approached it, but that desire to really make home about comfort and meaningfulness, and understanding that spending more time at home will be a reality. And the fifth area that will be important is, we've talked about travel limitations, self-isolation, lockdown. Government's going to play a role, and that could go either way, in terms of our trust in government. We'll either really listen and pay attention, or in some markets, as we've seen, the reverse can happen. So sorry to go into so much, but I think that sort of summarizes what I'm seeing, and certainly I'd love to hear from the rest on
I think you've raised a lot of really important points that do actually tie some themes that we've been thinking about. One that I actually would like to hone in on is, you're talking about trust and confidence, and to me that ties into authenticity. We started the conversation this morning talking about racism as a Canadian problem, our need to own that, be authentic and own up to that, which is like a deeply uncomfortable conversation. And when I think about that, that is a massive cultural shift over a couple of generations ago. People might have looked to community leaders or religion or governments to do that. Now we're looking to brands to do that. That's also a lot of responsibility. At the same time, there's this mass anxiety, and that kind of authenticity, I think, from a not-for-profit perspective, is certainly something that, not-for-profits tend to be mission-based, but the pressure is so significant. So, Sarah, I have to look to you to say, how is CMH navigating this? This has got to be, at the same time, you have to navigate. The world is almost exploding, but in your wheelhouse. So, talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's a big brand challenge.
Thank you. I think for us, there's a few things at play, but primarily it's about staying true to our values, which are about a world, achieving a state of a world where mental health is health at every step of the way, and living that internally as much as we're advocating for that externally. So we protect our brand, we're talking about brand today, by supporting the people who are responsible for that brand. We've done a lot organizationally and get great feedback organizationally for how the steps we've taken proactively, thoughtfully, with inclusive conversations that provide time and space for all to speak up in the way that's comfortable to them, to understand what we can and should be doing to be supportive. And then that enables us as humans who have jobs to deliver great connection through communications to our stakeholder base externally. So yeah, it's really, you're right. We have both a lot at play living in the hospital world, Corinne, you know that intimately. And we also have the advantage of super duper clarity on what our organizational purpose and mission is, which allows us to stay focused on that and adopt it internally as well as advocate externally.
So you just mentioned, listening and, being with your cohort, your colleagues, also listening to your clients, listening to participants, we're listening to the community. Clearly, we're listening to brands. To me, when I'm hearing that, I think a lot about, how we listen, and certainly that ties into the data conversation that we've been having this morning. So we heard from Bell, we heard from MasterCard in terms of, data. And data is so important, but it can also be really overwhelming to organizations. I know personally I've seen that, and you can either go lots and lots of white noise, or you can have deep insights. So Alison, I want to look to you to say, help us, think about that a little bit. When brands are capturing data, how are they making use of it? And what can folks here look from that?
Yeah, I mean, data is a pretty critical piece. I think particularly in a time where we're trying to make sense of an uncertain future, and empathy is a big part of it. So we have a lot of clients that come to us, and I think their biggest challenge is they have a lot of different data sources and they're not really sure how to pull it together in order to tell the right stories. Data has the power to be able to tell some really interesting stories that, provide insight into, the way you define what your experience strategy is and, how your brand moves forward. I think what's interesting about data, though, is that it's evidence of behavior. So in order to get the real empathy behind it, you need to have the data layer, but then also have that constant feedback loop. So listening to your customers is very important at this point. So making sure that there is enough of a feedback loop integrated within the experience at critical moments that you're getting that, the why behind the behavior is really shining through.
That's a big point to say evidence of behavior, because I feel like we're actually not acting the way we normally act. So what's that balance? And, that's an open question, but how do we actually evidence our own behavior when we're atypical on how we would normally behave?
Yeah, well, I mean, behavior is something that you can look at patterns of behavior that are the past, but when you're looking at a new normal, we do need to sort of set a new baseline. It's understanding, what are those nuances of behavior, really understanding the end-to-end customer experience. What's their journey as they move through, the context of the brand, and using data to be able to identify if there's a gap, or there's an opportunity for the brand to lean in and provide more value.
Could I add something there, Corinne?
Yeah,
I also think there's a couple things going on for me personally, and I'm so delighted to hear from Alison and Pina and yourself as other experts with different opinions perhaps. But I think now, because things are changing so quickly, there's an equal importance for me as an individual placed on instinct and understanding that the behaviors we're seeing in your team and in our stakeholder groups, wherever they are coming from, may not be completely rational, and sort of taking a little bit more time to instinctively inquire about that, and to acknowledge and understand that this may be a moment in time, and maybe go back to our data to look at trends that could help us inform how to move forward. So there's like an interesting balance. I don't think it's as clear cut as it used to be.
No, I would agree with that, you kind of have to do a check-in. So what does that look like? I mean, how are brands checking in? How are people experiencing that check-in with this moment is different, but I know that we have a data set that has proven this, and over a period might do something else.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing with clients and what we're sort of encouraging is that the time between gathering those insights and actually doing something has shortened. I think gone are the days where you wait for the research report and then you roll something out and it's a year later. It really is about, I think instinct is important, and I think it's really important to, at every point, take account of what is that new customer reality? How is it changing? how is my organization now set up to respond? And then really it's almost real time in how you are responding with your service or product.
Right. And that's a really hard thing for, any organization to do. Many organizations, it's like a slow moving ship to get it to turn. And, sometimes it's months and months and months. This is a forcing function, this moment that we're in, I think, for many organizations to shift in all kinds of ways. And that's really uncomfortable. And I think it creates even more anxiety. It creates more anxiety for leaders. It creates more anxiety for teams. How does that play out? How are people seeing that? Because that's a big part of your internal brand culture.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely seeing that. And again, it's back to living the value of creating space and opportunity to acknowledge that it's an anxious time to be human. Like the number of times in the last few months where I've gone completely out of my personal comfort zone to admit, and excuse my language, but that it's a terrible shit day. And here's what, and like, look at my disaster of a living room and my kids freaking out and I can't figure out how to turn off the bleepy thing on the computer and whatever. But like, that is our accountability as leaders from wherever we're sitting, leaders in title, leaders in opportunity, leaders, anybody can be a leader is what I'm trying to say, is to be true to our own experience so that we can acknowledge and create space for that becomes a little bit more comfortable. And then we can be supportive together to move through it.
I think that there's an opportunity to be curious about, what sometimes anxiety about a moment, I'm not talking about clinical, creates which I think is really important to say, creates an opportunity for inquiry. Like, what is it that is making us uncomfortable as an organization? What is it that is preventing us from doing something or feeling a lot of discomfort about that? And I think that there's an opportunity to use that. So I don't know, Allison, I'm looking to you to think about that, because I think that that is a moment where either innovation can take place or just fall flat. And I don't know about you, but I've experienced both just in the last week. So,
Yeah, there's definitely more of a shift towards looking at the employee experience. So really looking at innovating, how do you bring people together? How do you help people live the brand so that, especially when you think about the fact that so many of us are now working remote, we don't have the privilege of being able to collide with one another and collaborate with one another in person. So there's a lot of organizations that are now saying, let's take a pause and try to figure out how do we ensure that our internal employee experience is as great as our external brand experience, so that the two actually work well together and can help to support one another.
So you just said something that for me is a huge topic, and that's about the internal and the external. And because I work in healthcare where there is another language that exists altogether outside of normal human everyday common parlance, and people speak in like gibberish sometimes, that when you're in an anxious time, no one even understands. So can we talk a little bit about that internal, external voice? Because some of that is about that authenticity. I think people are craving to have from brands, but on the other hand, sometimes that internal voice isn't comprehensible to the outside. How can brands navigate that?
Well, I think that's where we stay true again to our ultimate mission and vision, right? And so the process and the path to get there is containing a whole lot more swerves than we maybe had ever anticipated. Certainly requires us to be able to deal in ambiguity more. We've already said all that, but the end goal should and needs to stay the same, and that can provide a nice guiding post for us as a brand externally and help us reflect compress the gibberish and make sense of it in alignment with our ultimate goal and vision.
Are there checks for that? Like, is there a way for brands to check in on whether or not their internal voice that's becoming external is actually resonating? Is there a tool?
There are many social listening tools, if that's what you're asking, Corinne. And just to
specifically, I'm saying generally, yeah.
I mean, just to underscore the importance of that, and what has shifted is that your brand is no longer, to your point, that external brand. That now that we are all digital, there are no hiding any internal warts of your organization. And, part of that brand, it's important to understand how companies are treating their employees and what are those internal stories. I mean, in a way, it makes that brand experience a lot more seamless. So, you can no longer ignore or separate what your external brand stands for and how that lands internally.
That's kind of laying it all bare. I don't think that when we think about organizational structure, that is, how most organizations think that they are going to, build a strategy. That's certainly not the brand identity and voice that they're necessarily planning. What's the balance? Not everything is for the outside. Maybe. I don't think. That's a question.
Yeah, I don't think that we're suggesting, I don't want to speak directly for my colleagues, but I don't think we're suggesting everything is for the outside. I think that's, again, our role as communicators is to provide a logical, data-focused instinct, in their opinion on what translates to the outside world in a compelling way that stays true to what we're trying to accomplish organizationally. And so it does require that the work has been done or needs to be done very quickly, if it hasn't, to be clear on what that organizational vision and objective is, because then you can just keep going back to that. So I think of that as like the foundational tool. What's our strategy? What are we trying to achieve? Okay, back here, back here, back here. We need to be authentic against this.
So the thing about authenticity is that it means that you'll necessarily stumble. We're human, and organizations are made up of people. So there will be stumbles. What's a good response in the face of that? To be authentic, but recognize that there will be stumbles.
Well, I think this is where it comes back to really focusing on the customer, really having an understanding of what it is they need, listening intently, making sure that there is that constant dialogue and understanding what they need, so that then internally there is that common understanding of who it is that the brand is serving ultimately, and externally there's a level of an appreciation that comes back to the brand. People will start to understand that this is a brand that's additive to my life. It's actually helping me. So,
right. In a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
No, and it's okay to experiment. And if you think about just the innovation process, there's going to be amazing products and services that come out of this craziness. And, in the process of getting there, it's okay to fail. There needs to be some tolerance to trying, failing, just the term of like hacking, just really hacking new ways of living. Like we've never been here before. So what does that look like? And really capturing that and having a tight kind of, interlock between listening and watching that behavior and innovating and bringing to market pretty quickly what's needing that demand.
That needs a culture that will allow for that, I think. And this is where I think your brand values, Sarah, coming back to your point about you need to be really clear about what those are, and having a sort of, predisposition and feeling comfortable with a fast fail. It's one thing to say that, and I think, we've all been to panels where we've heard, well, fail fast and pivot really quickly. So now we're all stumbling, trying to figure that out. And there needs to be some support network in that, because if you fail and then the organization cannot handle that, it can have the reverse or adverse effect. So how can culture help to shape that so that it's part of the brand?
I mean, listen, in some ways, it starts even before culture. I mean, if you're kind of redesigning how your organization operates, then it takes some thoughtful process. It can't just be haphazard, and you don't experiment with how your ways of working are. So we're actually helping organizations pivot to, how to become more digital, how to shift to become more innovative. It takes some effort. It takes some real change in operating model. That's not just structure, but it's ways of working and how to work more effectively virtually, how to partner with others outside the company. So there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into that, so that you you can then support a culture of innovation if that's what you're aiming for.
And I think there's I'm sorry.
Oh, Sarah, yeah.
I think there's a behavioral thing there too, where functioning in ambiguity and being nimble and adaptable and managing the swerve, it requires a certain approach as individuals contributing to the work. And that can be modeled. And that is, again, where our opportunity is as leaders to model both the success and the failure of what it's like to manage through fast fails and an innovative, ambiguous, nimble culture.
Yeah, I feel like the need for like a bendy flexy approach, right? And if you can't do that, that's going to be a real challenge because the world will shift and we'll all have to navigate that. That leads me to last question, because I know that we only have a couple minutes, but how can you bake that into a strategy that is, you know, keeping your brand intact, but at the same time being fluid enough? Because brands need strategy as a core. What are you seeing? What can people take home?
Like, I think that we've kind of touched on little bits of it throughout this conversation. I think, you know, there was something that Sarah had mentioned earlier, which is, you know, really making sure that there's a North Star that's established. You know, we're in a place right now where people really need to scrutinize how people are engaging with the brand today. So, you know, looking too far ahead is sort of a scary notion for a lot of organizations. But, you know, as long as you do have that direction in place, that guidepost in place, then it allows you to, you know, sort of take some baby steps along the way. And, you know, even what Pina was mentioning around the test and learn and that openness to experimentation, looking at sort of the micro moments within the experience and looking to optimize those. I think there's more of a sure win associated to any decisions that are made on the backbone of what people are asking for. So it kind of gives a little bit more of a pathway to innovate with purpose and understanding.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, Alison. The North Star is important, and it should be a what will drive growth for your product or service or efforts, and from there then is, you know, a clearly thought out strategy, and then comes capability and culture. So in that order. But if you don't get the North Star right and understand what you're all aiming for, then everything else gets a little messy.
Yeah.
And I'd add to that, you know, as a parent, I've learned this more poignantly than ever. Reward the behavior you want to see. Reward heavily over reward what you see doing well, happening well. Sorry, that was terribly said. Reward the behavior you want to see. There you go.
I think that in you know, a moment of so much uncertainty, that, you know, being able to galvanize around that, I love that North Star as a metaphor because there's light in it as well, and that tells us that we're actually out, we have time, and that we finished this part of our morning. But I want to thank you all. It's been a great opportunity to get to hear from you all as leaders and to gain those insights as to how we might move forward together. So thanks. Lucy, I think we're going back to you now.
Yes, thank you. Great discussion, everybody on the panel. And before we get to the Q&A session, I would like to thank everybody out there for attending CMAfuture. And thank you for tuning into this webinar today. Thank you to all our presenters and our panelists as well. And one big final thank you to all of our sponsors, Bell Media, Kantar, MasterCard, Accenture, and Appnovation. Again, this experience will be available as a recording and sent to everybody in the post-event email. I also just want to quickly mention that spend some time on the CMA.ca in order to remain connected with the marketing community at this time. So let's just jump into the Q&A. Let's bring back everybody, all our presenters and the panelists, and we'll start with our Q&A. I think the first couple of questions probably will go back to Margaret and Casey. So the first question we had from an anonymous attendee is, should companies publicly say what their goals are around diversity, and how should this be implemented in a powerful way?
Thanks, Lucy. I'll jump on that one. Margaret, if you have some additional thoughts, please do chime in. I love the question. Should companies publicly say what their goals are around diversity? The answer in a word is yes. I think where we are on some uncertain ground. And that panel, by the way, was amazing. So thank you to everybody who participated in that panel. I learned a lot. And a couple of thoughts really stuck with me. Now, Pina had talked a bit at the beginning about rebuilding trust. At Monitor, we've talked a lot about trust and building consumer trust over the years, and certainly as I also run our U.S. Monitor service as well, the collapse in consumer trust in institutions has been well documented, both south and north of the border, though it may be just like a different sort of magnitude in Canada, slightly lesser, but still significant. And rebuilding consumer trust is tricky. There's a Dutch proverb that I like to sort of remind myself about, that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. In other words, it takes a long time to build. It takes no time at all to lose. And so when we think about rebuilding trust, and I promise this will get back to the diversity thing. When we think about rebuilding trust, I think that trust is built one kept promise at a time. And so it can be a time-consuming process. I don't think you fix consumer trust in a day or in a month or even in a year. I think it's consistency and delivering on what you say you're going to do. So when it comes to setting goals and communicating those goals around diversity, I'd also go back to what Sarah said too, that, you know, you have to constantly refer to your North Star to figure out, you know, what the right message is to communicate along that journey. And so I think benchmarks and regular communication about the successes and notably the struggles in achieving benchmarks when it comes to building diversity internally is critically important. I think the most powerful way you can communicate it is, first of all, by committing to it. That's the first thing that any company would need to do. But the sort of second and more important part is being committed to transparency along the way, being willing to, update your customers and your brand fans on how you are doing along that journey, warts and all. It is an important sort of, I think, posture and position or disposition to take when trying to accomplish something as significant as changing the diversity and the makeup of your organization. And I'll add this, and I'll shut up. There might be no more important thing to do, particularly when it comes to, I think Corinne was talking about authenticity and these uncomfortable conversations that brands are being sort of forced to have. When it comes to authenticity, being able to communicate out to the world what you understand about, in particular, minority consumers, the best and most powerful way to be able to achieve that authenticity is from an inside out standpoint, to bring that talent in, inform your thinking, develop the kinds of communication and the executions that reflect the lived experiences of people who walk those shoes, who walk, a mile in those shoes, and then put those out. So it's truly important, I think, on a lot of levels.
Great, thank you. Did anybody have anything to add to that? I think you answered that really well. Thank you so much. And I think the other thing we can add to that possibly is that not only is the trust and transparency required for external communication, but it has to be lived internally within the organization itself. Something we're hearing a lot about. So next question, also for probably Margaret. Here it is from an anonymous attendee. In the past, millennials and Gen Z have had certain stereotypes in the workplace. Do you think with latest research, companies are more inclined to hire Gen Z because of their openness and inclusivity?
I would say the successful ones are absolutely. I think it's incredibly important. We know that diversity of thought is key to creativity and key to innovation. And so we need to have these diverse views of all different generations within the workplace. And Gen Z or Gen Z is probably a great source of more diverse thinking than we've ever seen before. So I think that really will help organizations shift. I know that the stereotypes, it's funny, I have a Gen Z at home. So the stereotypes of millennials are, oh, they're waiting for you to do, for you to give them direction. This isn't Gen Zs, right? Gen Zs are taking action. They're ready to step in and be at the table and provide their thoughts and their insights. So, you know, get on it. They're going to help change the world.
Absolutely. That's great. I have a Gen Z as well looking for a job. So hopefully you're right on that one. The next question is for Philippe. Following your presentation, we have a question from Una McNeil from UM, and she is asking, what level is the data aggregated for SAM targeting? Is it postal code?
Good question. So for SAM TV targeting, there are two steps. The first step is that we create segments based on browsing behaviors with Bell mobility data. So this is device related, but important to mention this is aggregated and de-identified. And then we match those behaviors with TV viewing patterns at the household level with five TV set-top boxes, again, aggregated, identified. So two steps in providing this data. And then we apply those learnings by selecting the programs that are most watched or over-indexing against these segments.
Great. And there was another question specific to the IKEA example. Are you able to then track their in-store visit geolocation and attribute that back to those who are exposed to the TV campaign?
Another good question. So we have the capability to do so, but our SAM TV attribution platform is an online attribution platform. And this is the one that we've chosen to automate first. And we have our own geolocation data, and we have GPS partner data as well. So right now we're doing that on an ad hoc basis, but we're working on the automation of it. So more to come.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Kobe from an anonymous attendee. How can retailers up their online services to stand out?
So that's a very, thank you, Lucy. That's a broad question. I think what we're seeing first and foremost at the outset of everything that happened was retailers and merchants were looking at as many distribution channels as possible to first of all be available, right? Secondly, we're starting to see retailers and merchants think a lot more about their point of view on enabling subscription services or specific value-added services to their existing customers. And we're also seeing a lot of merchants creatively pivot and, wow, what the word of 2020, pivot, but like thinking about other areas of business that they want to get into. So it's not, I don't know if it's about standing out. I think it's about making sure that you have a very strong distribution channel and testing within as many as possible and seeing which ones are driving incrementality or new customers or higher spend. And then going deep with those. And then also, this is an excellent opportunity to try new things, as I think customers and consumers are a lot more forgiving today because they understand that many merchants are trying to figure out new ways to engage with their customers, either by channel or even by product. So I think that would be my response. I think it's less about standing out with your online services and more about finding the right distribution channels and testing out new products and solutions for your customer base.
Right. And I'm just wondering, just adding on to that question for my interest,
Sure.
What about, we've heard a lot about Gen Z. Do they have to modify how they're working with their online services to reach that particular audience? Maybe Mark and Casey have seen something as well.
Well, I mean, personally, you know, I mean, I guess I think you got to start with a TikTok video with a dance that's going to get everyone's attention. No, but no, all jokes aside, I think absolutely right. I mean, even the research we've done with ourselves and partnered actually with Kantar on this, on the future of Centennials and Gen Z, it is a very different mindset around accountability and also, what was the word that was used? You know, showing up, right? And that behavior is very applicable to how you design products and solutions and engagements that work for those. But I'll let the rest of the panel add their comments to that question.
Anything on that? We can get to the next question. I think the next question is for the panel. So you mentioned the importance of brands and businesses responding to consumers in real time. Have you had to modify your approach given the pandemic, and how are brands preparing their community teams? Maybe Pina and Allison can talk to how they're talking to their clients about that.
Yeah, I mean, at Accenture, we've built a pretty impressive ecosystem around innovation. You know, we've acquired companies like What If happened. We've acquired like engineering companies to build. What's changed most dramatically for us is getting the virtual experience right. And it's not that we didn't do it in the past, but what is pretty amazing and maybe positive is that this whole pivoting of doing that is really, you know, you don't have to fly everyone, get on a plane, fly to do a workshop. Like, you literally pop into a virtual meeting and you can innovate, and you could do a lot virtually and then go try it and then actually come back. So there's more interaction in some ways and more global, more, you know, you can build a community virtually. So I like to look at sort of like, what's the upside of doing that and how do you respond? And we've had some pretty impressive sessions with global organizations and come up with some really amazing innovation, and then have continuous touch points with pretty senior executives that you wouldn't normally have had in the past.
Great.
Yeah, and I think the power of real time as well allows you to do that test and learn. So being able to put something in market, do some A/B testing, you know, put you know, beta products that are, you know, digitized in market, and, you know, just learn from them and be able to course correct and massage them in relative real time. It's not necessarily real time in that context, but there's definitely a little bit more malleability through, you know, the digital space, and by having that data foundation in place.
Great, thank you.
I have to say, Lucy, that I think that there's a lot of ways that you can do active listening that actually do have direct engagement, you know, with your consumer, your client base. In our case at Kensington, we have long-term care, and long-term care, as people know, is, you know, very much ground zero for COVID. And there's a lot of anxiety around it, and what we talk about and how we can talk about people potentially getting sick. People are getting sick. And one of the things that Kensington did was it organized a town hall to talk to families about what was happening in the community, being really honest about it. We had family members discussing it, looking at protocols. What does it actually look like? People were separated from loved ones. I mean, it was really, really frightening for people. The opportunity to actually get together in a space, virtual, and ask questions, see what was happening, became fodder for a deeper discussion, and ultimately had a great benefit. And certainly from a fundraising perspective, as an outcome of that, people gave, which I think was a surprise to the organization, though certainly from a fundraising perspective, we knew that that would be a strategy, that the more we talked about the need and the more evident we lay bare the challenges that we were facing, that people would respond. But that is really opening it up in terms of your inside, your outside, when people actually can't get inside. And that was a benefit. It's hard to do that. It is really uncomfortable to do that.
Maybe I could add, I know we're paneling it out here, but there's another question later that I could link in here around importance of listening to consumers. And at CMH, we launched recently a campaign entitled Not Suicide, Not Today. And we purposely had a huge priority within the consultation and development phase of that campaign on listening to our stakeholders with lived experience. It was really uncomfortable to learn the uncomfortable in how much time and effort it took in a marketing world where you're used to moving really quickly is what I'm referring to, and so beneficial to spend that time and be in that discomfort to learn from people who have experienced a suicidal ideation, have survived and overcome some serious mental illness. And it enabled what I believe is an incredibly powerful campaign to come to life. So that's another example, I think, of it's worth spending the time, even when none of us feel like we have it, to pay close attention to our key stakeholder group, even if it's feeling really, really uncomfortable. Great,
thanks for that, Sarah. Let's get to the next question. Back to Philippe. I think it's an add-on from your previous question. It says Bell basically matched the account of the TV subscriber to the account of the digital subscriber, both of which were being Bell. Is that clear?
So in a sense, yes. So for households who have both a 5 TV subscription and a 5 internet subscription, we're able to do attribution. So in a sense, that's respond to your question.
Okay, great. We have a question for Corey and Margaret. When brands take a stand on social issues, they may unintendedly alienate part of their target market. Could this be counter to a mass reach strategy? What is your opinion to balance this?
I'll take a stab at that one. I think this is a really cool question I know we're almost out of time, so I'll try and keep this short. I think that the basis, the sort of the assumption that kind of undergirds the question itself is one that a lot of companies and a lot of people that we talk to and that I talk to operate on, and that is that when it comes to D&I and when it comes to social issues, that this is a communications issue. This is a communications problem to solve with communications, and I think there's a bit of a fundamental flaw there. You know, Corinne talked a bit about this sort of like historic moment that we're in, this like massive, I think you used the word massive cultural shift that's been generations in the making about the expectation of the role in business in society. We have to think much more broadly on a question like this. Are we going to alienate some people and others and not others if we, direct our messaging at support for Black Lives Matter or something along those lines? That's from my perspective, a bit narrow, when truly what consumers are looking for are companies to get involved in creating societal solutions, not good messaging, but societal solutions. They're looking for action, not words. The words are the first thing you've got to do, but if you can't back them up with actions, then there's no point. And in a lot of instances, the actions matter more anyway. And the signaling, first is kind of putting the cart before the horse. So I guess I would just kind of urge all of us to think a bit broader about this massive shift in consumer expectation for the role of business in society. And what that means then is we can't afford to solve things with communications and virtue signaling only. We have to think a little bit bigger about the impact that we're willing to commit to making.
Great, thanks. Anybody else on that one? I think we have time for one or two more questions. I think this is kind of an add-on to the discussion we were previously having. So the question is, pre-COVID, there was a massive shift to creating personalized experiences for consumers. Now that the human one-to-one engagement in real time is no longer possible, how do we as brands address this when it is craved more than ever before? And how should brands prepare for a post-COVID world when in real-time engagement is possible again? Ooh, that's a big one. Anybody?
I mean, I can answer it maybe from one particular perspective, but as we have launched now 2 campaigns in the pandemic, we've had a duality of purpose and focus in each campaign, and that has been to both give help and get help at every step of the way. So that isn't exactly maybe experiential in the way that's being asked. And in each campaign, we've delivered a toolkit of resources that people can access for free wherever they are in the world, that allows them to experience exactly what we're trying to say to the world we do, right? So here's some things that may help you deal with isolation. Here's some things that may help you in your journey to prevent suicide. And so again, maybe not exactly what people are looking to hear, but like always thinking about how we're being helpful, delivering the experience that aligns to our brand values at the same time as we are requesting that people help us, being a fundraising engine.
Excellent.
And I think just to add.
Yeah, I would just go ahead, Alison, please.
Go ahead, Kobe. Yeah.
I mean, as a brand, we've been very focused on experiences for our cardholders. We've been doing this for quite some time, and we had to quickly pivot to online virtual experiences at the outset of COVID. We've been very pleased with the success of those experiences, and we plan on likely continuing to do that post-COVID. So one-to-one experiences don't necessarily, as much as we thought, had to be in physicality. They can be enabled in a digital environment as well, and not just in events, but even in customer engagement and solutioning. So I think that people have really been flexible on this topic, and we're seeing some great results when it comes to one-to-one engagement in digital environments. Alison, over to you.
I was actually going to say something very similar, and I think that it is a situation where, we are seeing a lot of that in real life, those moments now being translated into a digital context. And I think Kobe, you hit it bang on that, people are a lot more open to it. There's new conveniences that are associated with those digital interactions, and we start to crave those conveniences more so than the in real life. Not to say that in real life will never be part of the process, but I think that humanizing any experience, whether it's online or offline, is an integral piece.
Great, thank you. And just to add, Kobe, there was a question that came up asking about the revenge shopping in the top 3.
Yes.
You had answered that online, but I think it's quite interesting. So maybe you could answer that live.
Sure. Sure. So the question was, what were the number 2 and number 3 items on the revenge spending list? So I pulled up the data. Number 1 was vacation at travel, as we discussed. Number 2 is new clothes. And number 3 at numbers is a new phone, but interestingly enough, a new or used car was just under that. So it was clothes, a new phone, and a new or used car for the Canada population as the next best revenge spends.
Interesting, very interesting. So let's just do one more question, and I believe this is actually going to be for Philippe. With online streaming platforms like Netflix and Prime Video on the rise, are companies still seeing strong results in TV campaigns?
Oh, well, good question, but definitely. I mean, TV, as you've seen, has a massive reach, 9 out of 10 Canadians each week. And as you said with IKEA, the frequency builds up really, really fast. And you combine that with the storytelling, I mean, you have one of the strongest ROIs out there. And if you're interested in case studies, you can email me, or I know Think TV has the most recent evidence of TV's ROI. So definitely.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think that's it for all the questions. There may have been 1 or 2, and we can try to get to those following this webinar. But again, right now, we're going to be wrapping this up. So again, thank you to all of our presenters one more time. Thank you to the audience out there. And again, you'll be receiving this as a recording, and you'll also be getting a short survey. So please take some time to fill out that short survey. That's a wrap. Everybody, please stay safe and take care, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.